Chapter 3. Fresh meat! The cry went up as Sean stepped out of the rain into his new home. He blinked for a moment, eyes dazzled by the light. Then he felt King's hand on his shoulder, guiding him forward. Fresh meat! Fresh meat! As a group of black lads gathered round a table. They could have been any group of teenagers hanging anywhere, except for the crap tracksuits and the absence of burgers or cans. Some sat, some stood, with a bad case of PBS, prison bitch syndrome. Trousers hanging so far down their arses that if they wanted to take a piss, they would have had to pull them up to get everything aligned. They all thumped the tabletop in time with their chant. The unit was built around a large triangular open space. Cells lined each of the three sides at ground level and on a higher level, and in between was the common area. All the cell doors were open. Sean didn't know what time they all got locked up, but he guessed that during the day they could move about, at least a little. King just kept walking like the cheering lads weren't there. Sean glanced around, trying not to look worried. He couldn't see any other screws. There were prisoners watching TV, playing pool, just lounging on beanbags and jawing. One thing he noticed immediately. Each race stuck together. Asians, whites, blacks. Each clustered together, just like the world he knew outside. And the whites were subdivided too. Body language and other subtle clues told him that the group of lads sitting at the table there were distinct from the group lounging there. The table lads, he was prepared to bet, were fellow East Londoners. The lounging ones had rangy bodies, lean faces, severe haircuts. He wouldn't have been surprised if they were East Europeans. Everyone who was standing or walking had both hands shoved down the front of their tracksuit bottoms, apparently holding their bollocks. Maybe for protection, maybe for warmth, maybe to keep their PBS bottoms up. For the first time in his life, Sean realized that he had no idea. No idea at all. Usually you saw a gang of teenagers, and if you didn't know them, then you thought, what the fuck are they doing here? Because they were strangers in your manor. So that kind of streamlined the process of deciding if they were going to be friends or enemies. He had only a few seconds to size them up. He was taller than half of them. Also, probably younger. Okay. He met the eye of the loudest, the largest, as he followed King. The other lad looked back and began to shout and thump even louder. A big cross dangled on a chain round his neck. Sean slowly raised his hand, middle finger extended, and turned it into a scratch behind his ear. Then he lowered the finger again, keeping it extended for as long as he could. The other lad's eyes narrowed and he extended his own finger back. That was the opening pleasantries dealt with. Sean flashed his friendliest grin. No, but seriously, guys, he said as he walked past. He turned to face them so that he was walking backwards. You're too kind. And I'd love to have you all queue up and suck my dick, but, you know. He put all the fingertips of one hand to his mouth and gave them an elaborate, lingering kiss. He never took his eyes off the other lad, and as he turned, he tapped the fingers he had just kissed against his bum crack and gave his hips an extra wiggle for good measure. The message was obvious. Kiss my arse. King glanced sideways at him but said nothing. Sean still had no idea if he had just made friends or enemies, but he'd made his mark. And then? Shawnee! Sean's head whipped round just in time to catch someone advancing on him like a runaway petrol tanker bearing down on a moped. He just had a chance to take in the shock of red hair and a pair of arms that could bend steel pipes, and then Copper had flung his arms round him in a bear hug and hoisted his feet off the ground, shaking him. Fuck me, it's Sean fucking Harker. So they sent you here, you poor dumb fuck. Copper was a lad with two very obvious defining features. The first was his short but bright red hair, and if anyone thought that taking the piss out of it was a good idea, then his other defining feature usually put them off. He was massive. Hi, Copper, Sean gasped between shakes. And even though he was glad, all the usual Copper precautions were sliding into place. You put a smile on your face. You thought extra hard about everything you were about to say, because if he ever took offence, then there would be zero time to unsay it. With these defences in place, you could enjoy being around him, because for all his faults, Copper was one of the 3 big brothers Sean had never had, along with Matt and Gaz. Copper had taught him to fight, and fight hard, and 1 or 2 other lessons, including, don't be like Copper. Put him down and step away, Mulroy, the warder's voice had suddenly taken on a harsher tone. Copper slowly put him down and backed off. It's okay, Mr. King. Sean and I go way back. He ruffled Sean's hair. Right? Sean knocked his hand away, still with a grin. Right, yeah. Matt said you'd be here. Yeah? How's he doing? All on his own, some? Hey, Mulroy! It was the big black lad calling, the one with the cross. Your friend has respect issues. Ah, fuck off, Tag. Copper didn't even look round, and Sean saw how Tag's eyes narrowed a little. Okay. So where are you putting him, Mr. King? The officer regarded Copper coldly. There wasn't much point telling him to walk away. He's in 22, he said. This way, Harker. 22, Sean, Copper said with a wink. See you in 30 seconds. King led Sean up the steps to the next level and stopped by a cell door. Your new home from home? Sean stepped in, trying to ignore the thick steel that he knew would close behind him soon enough. The room was small and simple. It was lit by a strip light on the ceiling, and grey light seeping in from a barred window. A single bed stood against one wall, and another wall had a stainless steel toilet and a sink. There was a desk, where a brown envelope lay next to a box just about large enough for a pair of shoes, with a TV above it, bolted to the wall and spewing out the news. The rolling headlines mentioned a bomb alert on the tube, a stabbing in Croydon, a strike by firemen and ambulance drivers until the police could offer them better protection on call-outs. I'll be back in half an hour for your first night interview, said King. Until then, just try and settle in as best you can. Then he was gone. Sean chucked his towel on the bed, tipped the contents of the envelope out on the desk. 2 small bars of soap, white plastic comb, 2 tubes of toothpaste and a pale blue toothbrush. Hey, Sean, look who's here. Copper filled the doorway behind him, but he pulled someone forward and sent him into the cell with a thrust of one powerful arm. Hey, Sean, Gaz Dobson said quietly. Big brother number 3, and the one Sean was actually properly glad to see. He hadn't set eyes on Gaz since the raid that got him and his old man Nick for running one of the most profitable vehicle chop shops in London. Too much money had been passing through it for either of them to get probation. Losing both Dobsons in one go had hit the guy's income hard. If Matt had taught Sean how not to get caught, it was Gaz who had taught him how to nick in the first place. Even when he was just a kid, Sean had known his way around a car engine and how to break into one. It was the ultimate rush and the best way to pull girls. Yo, Gaz! Sean strode forward with a grin on his face, hand held out to bump fists. Gaz had shrunk since they last saw each other. He seemed to stand a little wonky, even allowing for the stupid tracksuit. He took just a moment too long to return the fist bump. Good to see you, Sean. He winced as Copper thumped him on the back. How cool is this? 3 guys together. We're going to rule this place. Say, lucky you got nicked when you did. I'm out in January, and Gaz is getting on. A few months later, you'd have missed us both. Took Sean a moment to work out what he meant. Gaz was pushing 21, like Copper, while Sean had just turned 16. Another few months and Copper would be out, and Gaz would be too old for a young offender institution. Their paths wouldn't have crossed. Gaz was more helpful. He nodded at the small pile of toiletries on the desk. You'll have to buy your own when they run out. He had his arms wrapped around himself. Sean nodded his thanks and turned to the box. Small boxes in sachets. Cereal, milk, tea, bread, jam. And that's your breakfast pack. Proper full English on Sundays, otherwise it's this stuff. So, Gaz. Sean sat down on the bed, bounced experimentally. The springs creaked. No silent wanks in this place, Copper said cheerfully, and laughed like a drain. How are you doing? Sean finished his question. Gaz looked at him like he'd just said a very, very stupid thing. You mean, apart from being locked up, and the fact that there's a condition I don't ever get to work with vehicles again? Sean gaped. Shit, no, but... There was no but. Cars were Gaz's life. End of. Gaz just shrugged and got another slap on the back from Copper. Ignore him. So, Sean, when we brung you up so well, how did you go and get caught? Sean pulled a face. He'd known this was coming. After you two got nicked, he began. Copper encouraged him to keep going with a nod. Matt thought he'd give me and Curly a chance to step up. Copper's eyes had narrowed. Oh, crap. When are you going to learn, Sean? I mean, obviously we'd never replace you, he said quickly, but, you know, Matt needed the help. That's how it goes, Gaz said with a shrug, taking the sting out of it. And he took us on a job. Patel's quality used vehicles off Ilford Hill. Patel's, huh? There was actually the ghost of a smile on Gaz's face. Patel's had been the chief rival to his old man's operation. Good choice. Yeah, Sean said heavily. You'd think. It should have been the perfect crime. Sean had been taught by the best in the business, Gaz's dad, that if you really want to make money, then you let the other guy do the work. You let someone else pimp a car up with all the flash gear, and then you take it all off again. Gaz's old man made more money selling off the bits, rims, stereos, body kits, than if he just sold the whole car, and Patel's parts would be untraceable. Half of them would be hooky too, with the old serial numbers filed off. They wouldn't have been going to the cops in a hurry. Sean and the lads would have got into the shop, found the keys to all the cars, ripped off as many parts as they could, loaded them all up, and driven them back to a secure lock-up at Lytton Mills. Job done, and Patel severely pissed off. Only it all went tits, Sean added, carefully not mentioning who had been the one to drop the phone. Anyway, that twat Curly shouldn't have nudged him. He described the jump, and the motorbike, and what had happened next. Copper howled with laughter. Oh, Harker, you stupid tosser. OK, well, it's done, and here we are. You, me, Gaz, we're going to rule this joint. You'll see. Soon after that, King was back. Took Sean to the medical centre, where the doctor listened to his chest and back with a stethoscope, shone a light into his eyes and ears, and asked questions about his medical health. Then it was over to a small meeting room in the unit where Prison Officer Jackie Parker shuffled papers in a folder, gave him a patient, friendly smile that was just too switched on for his liking, and asked if he had ever thought of self-harm or suicide. She tried to convince him that if he behaved himself, he could get out of this place with a clean break from the past and never have to come back again. After the interview, King took him for his first shower in captivity. Then he was able to grab some fish and chips, and finally it was back to his cell, his hair still damp. The sound of the door closing and locking behind him echoed around inside his skull long after he had gone to bed. First he just lay there, staring at the ceiling. Next to the smoke detector there was a red arrow in a circle, with words in English and, he guessed, Arabic. Qibla prayer direction. Then the lights went out automatically. After that he lay on his back in the dark and stared at the ceiling, where the detector and the arrow would be. Ahead of him lay a week-long induction. Then, the rest of his sentence. Beyond that, the rest of his life. But to progress to any of that, first he had to get to sleep. It had been a long day, the shittiest one of his life. But it was still way too early for bed, and his body was pumped full of adrenaline. Burnley was too quiet. Sean missed the music and voices and road noise that you got on the estate. The silence was almost like a steady background roar, but it was enveloping. He could feel it surrounding him, and at last it brought sleep with it. His last thought was that, hey, it was shit, but he had 2 friends here. Well, 1 friend in Copper. It might be all right. An electronic scream blasted into his eardrums, and every muscle in his body spasmed. He sat up sharply and bellowed into the darkness. The fuck? Alarms were blaring out in the corridors. Durr! 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 He heard shouts and booted feet running on lino. There was a crackle of static, and an amplified voice spoke. All inmates, stand by your beds and prepare for evacuation. All inmates, stand by your beds and prepare for evacuation. Evacuation? Sean threw his duvet back and clambered out. Something tickled his nose, and he paused and sniffed. Smoke. Not tobacco smoke. Smoke. The kind that smelled dirty and gritty and burned the inside of your nose. The kind where things were burning that weren't supposed to burn. Fuck. There'd been a fire on the estate when he was little. A confused OAP with dementia who didn't understand ovens had been cooking his food on an open fire in the living room. It had got out of control. The block had been evacuated. Sean remembered the smoke creeping up the stairwells and through the vents, and he remembered weeping with fear and impatience as his stupid cow of a mum waddled her way down the stairs along with everyone else, not letting go of his hand and not moving fast enough. To smell that strong, this fire had to be big, or close, or both. Sean paced around the cell. The smoke smell was growing more intense. Outside he could hear the sounds of keys in locks and men shouting orders. Come on, come on! Let me out of here! And it was his turn. The screw pulled the door open. Assemble outside the front entrance. Sean didn't need to be told twice. Out in the corridor he understood why the smell of smoke had been so heavy. The air outside the cell next door was still hazy. From inside he could hear the bellowing gush of fire extinguishers. A dark-haired lad sat by the door, hugging his knees and laughing hysterically while 2 screws stood over him. "You dumb prat, Omar!" shouted a familiar voice. Copper barged his way down the corridor, a scary sight in just his underwear. A screw tried to confront him and was bowled aside. 2 more moved forward immediately, shoulder to shoulder to block his way. "That'll do, Mulroy! You could have killed us all!" Copper bellowed. Omar's laughing just grew even louder. "Get a move on!" A screw gave Sean a shove towards the exit. It was an hour before they were allowed back inside. The fire brigade had to check the building and confirm that all fires were out. 30 minutes were spent shivering and trying to shelter from the rain under the plastic cover of the walkway until the screws finally thought to bring blankets round. Sean, Gaz and Copper huddled together in their own little group. Copper was large enough to act as a windbreak for the other 2. He and Gaz filled Sean in on what was happening, though he had worked most of it out for himself. Omar had set fire to his bedding and clothes. Those things were meant to be non-flammable, so he must have gone to a lot of trouble to get hold of something that would help them burn, and Omar had previous. This wasn't the first time. "He's been in and out of the shrink's office more often than my dick's been in and out of your mum," Copper explained. "Fucking insane, that's what he is. Should be put away with the other fucktards." So fucking selfish, Sean thought as he pulled his blanket round his shoulders. There had to be ways of topping yourself that didn't involve killing everyone else. Eventually, they were allowed back into their cells. 5 minutes later, the lights went out again. Sean stared into the darkness. He had known this place would be different. He had known that he could take nothing from his old life for granted. This place would not be normal. He hadn't realized just how far from normal it would be. He thought it might be all right. It wasn't. He lay sleepless for the rest of the night, in a place where a lad just like him had been prepared to set fire to himself and everyone else rather than face another day.